Transformation is the complete sacrifice of one form to another, as when the acorn is destroyed in the process of becoming an oak, as opposed to molding one's identity to better fit into an outer world. Transformation is a process of becoming what one inherently is. Or maybe it's more the unbecoming what one has been conditioned into by our Western society, which is reconnecting to the roots of the mother tree, sensing the unlost instinct by Donna Williams. Quote, "The realm of sensing is the place we have all come from, that world before mind was thought of as me, before body became mind." Ah. And yes, I read that on purpose. That time when we knew, because we felt, the nature of things, the feel of them, when we sensed. This was before we had learned to interpret and see the world not as it was, but through our concepts and ideas of what it was. But in a world where interpretation is highly valued, where the realm of mind, of imposed meaning, of words, become the place of trust, of proof, a world in which the system of sensing becomes progressively redundant, devalued, discredited, even discouraged and pathologized. This book is a journey into a unique way of experiencing the world, suggesting how this unlost instinct has much to teach us about the assumption of so-called normality. One's own world. This is our first world, before all of its later cladding and contortions. It is at first a place of sensing, of beingness, the preconscious mind and unknown knowing. It is the place where we understand self in others and others in self through the skill of mergence. And this is exactly what shamans do. They understand the essence of it by experiencing that in themselves. They get the whole picture. The difference between the shaman and the doctor is that the doctor treats illness by identifying it out there, while the shaman attends to a patient's illness as mirrored within herself. The doctor holds herself apart from the suffering masses, treating symptoms through external intervention, while the shaman knows that anything she observes in the other is part of herself, for there are no others. She treats symptoms by merging with suffering and letting the antidote arise from experience, which is the inner knowing of things.
Anna got information that was accurate. I could verify it with the caregivers of both these animals, and I know that she didn't know anything about these animals before we got here. And so the simplest explanation seems to be she's getting her information from the animals. But then all these questions then come up, like, how is she doing that? What is she doing? And can we all do this?
For any of us to connect with the fabric of life, it's important to find some quiet time in natural surroundings. To restore my balance and renew my sense of inner peace, I spend quite a lot of time in nature just simply being quiet and absorbing a harmonious state of being with the aspects of nature around me. And it's when I'm in this state that animals will often spontaneously approach me. And I'm always very humbled by that. It's always great to have an animal in its natural environment allow me close, as if I'm no threat or disturbance on the landscape. Then I know that my inner state is matching that animal state of presence and well-being. From a quantum point of view, which is the more sort of recent side of physics perhaps, we are all as beings walking, talking collections of molecules that are made up of atoms, that are made up of quanta. And as unique bundles of quanta, we vibrate with a very unique energetic frequency. So this is how different individuals show up in the universe as having a unique energetic fingerprint or footprint, if you like. So an analogy would be to talk about, imagine that we're tuning in like a radio frequency to the particular radio station that is that unique frequency of that animal that we're connecting with. And once we have sort of dialed them up in the universe of all possible beings, we then have an open and clear communication channel between us and that animal. And it's across that channel that information passes freely in both directions.
The essence of what Anna is claiming to do is not new. Most indigenous communities around the world also speak of being able to communicate with animals. The survival of these communities depended on the hunt. And so it seems that tracking is the origin of this ability to be able to communicate with the natural world.
I believe people had that all the time. It's a natural gift. It comes with being born in nature. We're all part of nature, just that we become educated and thought we could do better without it. So it's a natural gift that we have as human beings, and it's just reclaiming it.
The birds, plants, night sky, yeah, the river, everything. Yeah, they become your family. Yeah. More like everything's part of you. They're connected to you in relation with the land.
Ways of Seeing by John Berger. Seeing comes before words. The child looks and recognizes before it can speak. But there is also another sense in which seeing comes before words. It is seeing which establishes our place in the surrounding world. We explain that world with words, but words can never undo the fact that we are surrounded by it. The relation between what we see and what we know is never settled. The surrealist painter Margaret commented on this always present gap between words and seeing in a painting called The Key of Dreams. Becoming animal brings us home to ourselves as living organs of this wild planet. Its teachings leap off the page and translate immediately into lived experience. A stunning, compelling journey into embodied, earthly intelligence. Prepare for a wild, profound ride into the essence of the human animal, an essence embedded in communion with the earth. A recognition of intelligences other than our own enables us to enter into reciprocal symbiosis that can in turn sustain the world. A way forward in restoring relationship with the earth, led by our vibrant animal bodies, to re-inhabit the glittering world. This book is like a prehistoric cave. If you have the nerve to enter it and you get used to the dark, you'll discover things about storytelling which are startling, urgent, and deeply true. Things each of us once knew but forgot when we were born into the 19th and 20th centuries. Extraordinary rediscoveries. Quote from the book Becoming Animal, An Earthly Cosmology by David Aber.
You know, that whole thing of before enlightenment scrub toilets, after enlightenment scrub toilets. We're just, we are here to simply be. And if we are really in a state of presence that is having us be, we wouldn't think, and here's the key word as well, think. We wouldn't think of doing. We wouldn't think of doing. We would naturally rise into a state of being, and whatever is possible for both beings to navigate with in those moments would arise. Sometimes these things that are inconvenient for us or unpleasant or may lead to disease are things we can simply take preventative measures around. And we modern humans have got so disconnected from nature. We seem to, somewhere along the line in our disconnection, en masse, have come to believe that we are more highly ordained and supposed to be kind of rulers of the planet, or at least with a greater right to life. Derek Jensen, by the way, describes this very well in his book. Which title?
I looked him up just now, and there's one book, The Myth of Human Supremacy. Is that the one you were thinking of?
Nope.
There's another one called Endgame, another one called A Language Older Than something or other.
That's one, A Language Older Than Words.
I see.
Yes, A Language Older Than Words is his rather skeptical and reluctant discovery of interspecies communication and getting direct impulses from even the forests and the ecosystems that he was fighting for.
Attitudes about interspecies communication are the primary difference between Western and indigenous philosophies. Even the most progressive Western philosophers still generally believe that listening to the land is a metaphor. She paused, then continued emphatically. It's not a metaphor. It's how the world is. I looked at the river. It would be easy to observe the eddy and make up a half-dozen lessons I could learn from it. For example, the obvious metaphor of the logs traveling in circles, like people trapped in a confining mindset that doesn't allow them to re-enter the free flow of life. There's certainly nothing wrong with fabricating metaphors from the things we find around us or from the experience of others, human or otherwise. But in both of those situations, the other remains a case study onto which we project whatever we need to learn. That's an entirely different circumstance than listening to the other as it has its say, reveals its intents, expresses its experience, and does all this on its own terms.
This is the best explanation in a nutshell. What our world has become, at least the Western world, the interpretive world, the world of applied meaning to incoming experiences that progressively builds mental structures and frameworks that ultimately filter our direct sensed experiences of the physical world, and develops conscious mind as the primary guide, the ego mind. Ego world, ego contortion that further clads, alters and filters the logical meaning we get from experiences of the physical world, and further buries our original capacity for sensing and beingness. So we have become human doings, which think that an accomplished life is doing and being successful, having a career and whatnot. Completely disconnected from the natural world and the essence of things. And yes, it is indeed society's indoctrination, the culture we find ourselves in, economics, identifications, rewards, and always competing with each other, social, economic, cultural currency. And if you can't adapt, you are pathologized and labeled as not being so-called normal. But actually, it is the other way around. We have removed ourselves so far from what normal is in the original sense, knowing our essence and being able to connect and sense.
When I was 9 years old, I went off to summer camp for the first time, and my mother packed me a suitcase full of books, which to me seemed like a perfectly natural thing to do, because in my family, reading was the primary group activity. And this might sound antisocial to you, but for us, it was really just a different way of being social. You had the animal warmth of your family sitting right next to you, but you were also free to go roaming around the adventure land inside your own mind. And I had this idea that camp was going to be just like this, but better. I had a vision of 10 girls sitting in a cabin, cozily reading books in their matching nightgowns. Camp was more like a keg party without any alcohol. And I just waited for the time that I could go off and read my books. But the first time that I took my book out of my suitcase, the coolest girl in the bunk came up to me and she asked me, "Why are you being so mellow?" Mellow, of course, being the exact opposite of ROWDIE. And then the second time I tried it, the counselor came up to me with a concerned expression on her face, and she repeated the point about camp spirit and said we should all really work very hard to be outgoing. And so I put my books away back in their suitcase, and I put them under my bed, and there they stayed for the rest of the summer. And I felt kind of guilty about this. I felt as if the books needed me somehow, and they were calling out to me, and I was forsaking them. But I did forsake them, and I didn't open that suitcase again until I was back home with my family at the end of the summer. Now, I tell you this story about summer camp. I could have told you 50 others just like it. All the times that I got the message that somehow my quiet and introverted style of being was not necessarily the right way to go, and that I should be trying to pass as more of an extrovert. And I always sensed deep down that this was wrong, and that introverts were pretty excellent just as they were. But for years, I denied this intuition. And I made these self-negating choices so reflexively that I wasn't even aware that I was making them. Now, this is what many introverts do, and it's our loss for sure. But it is also our colleagues' loss, and our community's loss. And at the risk of sounding grandiose, it is the world's loss, because when it comes to creativity and to leadership, we need introverts doing what they do best. A third to a half of the population are introverts. A third to a half. So that's 1 out of every 2 or 3 people you know. So even if you're an extrovert yourself, I'm talking about your coworkers and your spouses and your children and the person sitting right next to you right now. All of them subject to this bias that is pretty deep and real in our society. We all internalize it from a very early age without even having a language for what we're doing. Now, to see the bias clearly, you need to understand what introversion is. And it's different from being shy. Shyness is about fear of social judgment. Introversion is more about how do you respond to stimulation, including social stimulation. So extroverts really crave large amounts of stimulation, whereas introverts feel at their most alive and they're most switched on and they're most capable when they're in quieter, more low-key environments. Not all the time, these things are an absolute, but a lot of the time. So the key then to maximizing our talents is for us all to put ourselves in the zone of stimulation that is right for us. But now here's where the bias comes in. Our most important institutions, our schools and our workplaces, they are designed mostly for extroverts and for extroverts' need for lots of stimulation. And also, we are living through this belief system. We have a belief system right now that I call the new groupthink, which holds that all creativity and all productivity comes from a very oddly gregarious place. So if you picture the typical classroom nowadays, when I was going to school, we sat in rows. We sat in rows of desks like this, and we did most of our work pretty autonomously. But nowadays, your typical classroom has pods of desks of 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 kids all facing each other. And kids are working in countless group assignments, even in subjects like math and creative writing, which you would think would depend on solo flights of thought. Kids are now expected to act as committee members. And for the kids who prefer to go off by themselves or just to work alone, those kids are seen as outliers often, or worse, as problem cases. And the vast majority of teachers reports believing that the ideal student is an extrovert as opposed to an introvert, even though introverts actually get better grades and are more knowledgeable, according to research. Okay, same thing is true in our workplaces. Most of us work in open plan offices without walls, where we are subject to the constant noise and gaze of our coworkers.
So you see, I always feel it when other people sit in my system. And this is more of emotional awareness, because in the absence of these people, I then realize the difference. Because immediately I reconnect to my heart essence. And then I feel cheerful, happy, and also towards other people, I feel loving kindness and compassion, and I feel open. And this is a very, very different state in comparison to when all these other people that live in this house from above make noise, and just by their presence, and also below. So I just feel them. I cannot describe it in a different way, but I always know the difference when they are absent. So now the house is empty. Nobody above, nobody below, just me in the house. And this energy is very, very, very different. And I don't feel stressed. I feel very calm, very relaxed, joyful, energetic, creative. And this is such a rare case. And this is why I wanted to record this, also as a reminder to myself. When I am stressed, this is not me. This is not my essence. This is from overwhelm and what my system, my nervous system, but also my sensing system is taking in on a daily basis. When all of these factors, these stressors fall away, I feel my essence. And then it's just such a different state to be in. It's so beautiful. And therefore, I just realized, yeah, I need to move away into solitude or just a place where all these interferences are not present. And only then I can actually connect to my true essence and just have this knowing, have realizations. And I think only in that state of mind I am of service to other people. In a stressed state, this is not helping anyone, because then I'm just reactive to the stressors around me. So when the nervous system gets a chance to actually calm down and just be, then so much potential comes out of it. Potential to create and share. And there is always that deep caring that also is revealed to me. And the essence of empathy that I can reconnect with, that I know is there. But when I'm stressed, there is just so much debris that covers all that. Yeah, so it's just a realization, and basically 1 week after the Amanita 2.4 gram journeying and all the integration that happened in this week. And right now my heart center is open, it feels warm. And that's always what I try to connect with, the heart center, this openness, this beingness of deep empathy, but also being myself and not feeling judged, not feeling stressed, and just enjoying the present moment. And that's so valuable to experience that again. And my goal is actually to establish a way of being where this state of heart connectedness is always present and not a rare experience.
Silencing. Our behavior is a function of our experience. We act according to the way we see things. If our experience is destroyed, our behavior will be destructive. If our experience is destroyed, we have lost our own selves. R.D. Laing. There is a language, older by far and deeper than words. It is the language of bodies, of body on body, wind on snow, rain on trees, wave on stone. It is the language of dream, gesture, symbol, memory. We have forgotten this language. We do not even remember that it exists. In order for us to maintain our way of living, we must, in a broad sense, tell lies to each other, and especially to ourselves. It is not necessary that the lies be particularly believable. The lies act as barriers to truth. These barriers to truth are necessary because without them, many deplorable acts would become impossibilities. Truth must at all costs be avoided. When we do allow self-evident truths to percolate past our defenses and into our consciousness, they are treated like so many hand grenades, rolling across the dance floor of an improbably macabre party. We try to stay out of harm's way, afraid they will go off, shatter our delusions, and leave us exposed to what we have done to the world and to ourselves, exposed as the hollow people we have become. And so we avoid these truths, these self-evident truths, and continue the dance of world destruction. As is true for most children, when I was young, I heard the world speak. Stars sang, stones had preferences, trees had bad days, toads held lively discussions, crowed over a good day's catch. Like static on a radio, schooling and other forms of socialization began to interfere with my perception of the animate world, and for a number of years, I almost believed that only humans spoke. The gap between what I experienced and what I almost believed confused me deeply. It wasn't until later that I began to understand the personal, political, social, ecological, and economic implications of living in a silenced world. This silencing is central to the workings of our culture. This staunch refusal to hear the voices of those we exploit is crucial to our domination of them. Religion, science, philosophy, politics, education, psychology, medicine, literature, linguistics, and art have all been pressed into service as tools to rationalize the silencing and degradation of women, children, other races, other cultures, the natural world and its members, our emotions, our consciences, our experiences, and our cultural and personal histories. We are the land. That is the fundamental idea of Native American life. The land and the people are the same. Paula Gunn Allen. Since nature makes nothing purposeless or in vain, it is undeniably true that she has made all animals for the sake of man. Aristotle. My conversation with coyotes began, so far as I could tell, on a cold day in 1994. Several times over the previous months, coyotes had come out of the small patch of rocky forest to the east of my home and caught chickens, then taken them away to eat. Once in a while, I saw a coyote dash out or heard a squawk, then turned to see a quick glimpse of gray that simply disappeared when my two dogs tried to run it down. A few times the dogs did catch up to the coyote, and I saw a flurry of fur and dust, followed by the dogs running home to sit quietly, chastened, for a day or two in the barn. Twice, I saw one coyote make an abortive rush at the chickens, and when the dogs gave chase, another coyote trotted from the other direction to pick up a bird before I, the dogs, or the poultry, all distracted, could react. But most often, I merely saw one less duck or chicken or goose return to the coop from a day spent foraging in the tall grass or among the maze of trails beneath the thicket of wild roses to the west of my house. Then I would walk in the forest to the east and discover somewhere a roundish scatter of feathers, white, black, or barred, sometimes red or even iridescent green, where the coyote had stopped to eat the bird. The day the conversation began, I was kneeling in front of the wood stove trying to start a fire, when suddenly I felt if I looked outside, I would see a coyote. Perhaps the feeling came simply because on each of the previous 4 days, a chicken had disappeared. Never before had the coyotes been so present. I went to the window and looked out. A coyote was stalking a bird. By the time I made it to the front door, it had disappeared. The next 2 days, I happened to be outside when one or another coyote came by. No intuitions these times, just luck. The coyotes had come now for 7 straight days. On the 8th day, I happened to be on the couch looking out the window, lucky again, when I saw a coyote approach. Frustrated, knowing I couldn't be there each day to protect the birds and unsure what else to do, I opened the window and called out, "Please don't eat the chickens. If you don't, I will give you the head, feet, and guts whenever I kill one. And please don't forget my work in defense of the wild." The coyote turned and trotted away, now and again slowing to look back over its slender shoulder. Except at night to sing, the coyotes didn't come back for many months. And when at last they did, it was, it seemed, only to remind me to keep my end of the bargain. I hadn't yet killed any birds, and I looked out one day to see a coyote sitting on a knoll about 100 yards to the north. He sat and stared in my direction, not moving when I opened the window and leaned out. Finally I said, fairly softly actually, "Okay, I'll bring you some food." As soon as I said this, the coyote stood and began to pad away. Another coyote appeared, and they touched noses. The first one continued, and the second now sat and stared. I repeated my promise, and this coyote too went off in the direction of the other. It is not too much to say that a primary purpose of Descartes' philosophy, and indeed much of modern science, is to provide a rational framework on which to base a system of exploitation. Descartes himself stated this plainly when he observed, "I perceive it to be possible to arrive at a knowledge highly useful in life, and thus render ourselves the lords and possessors of nature." Had Descartes been a lone lunatic wishing to become a lord and possessor of nature, none of us would ever have heard him. But he had an entire culture for company. His fame and influence make plain that he articulated what continues to be a powerful cultural desire. Another of the progenitors of the scientific method was Francis Bacon, who formalized the process of inquiry by which a scientist develops a hypothesis, then gathers data in order to support or invalidate it. Bacon's intent was clear. "My only earthly wish is to stretch the deplorably narrow limits of man's dominion over the universe to their promised bounds." The language of dominance saturates his writing. He talks of putting nature on the rack and extracting her secrets, and of storming her strongholds and castles. At no time did Bacon hide his agenda. "I am come in very truth leading you to nature with all her children to bind her to your service and make her your slave. The mechanical inventions of recent years do not merely exert gentle guidance over nature's courses, they have the power to conquer and subdue her, to shake her to her foundations." It would be as pointless as it would be easy to blame Descartes, Bacon, and other early scientists and philosophers for the sorry tradition of exploitation that has been handed down to us by our elders. These people merely articulated brilliantly urges that are woven together throughout our culture like rivulets in sand. These are the urge to deny the body and the urge to dominate the bodies of others, the urge to silence oneself and the urge to silence others, the urge to exploit, the urge to deny death, and the urge to cause the deaths of others, or more accurately, as we shall see, to cause their annihilation. These urges are clear in the philosophy of Aristotle, and they are vivid, blood red in the Bible. They go as far back as Gilgamesh and the other formative myths of our culture, and they are as close as today's newspaper, where new myth makers continue in the path of Descartes and Bacon, attempting to provide rational justification for that which cannot be justified.
Beautiful, beautiful books, The Spell of the Sensuous and Becoming Animal. And he's really deeply in touch with the relational space that is available all around us, even with seeming inanimate things like the walls of our own home. He's had some interesting encounters with traditional shamans from around the world.
With the molten sky, feeling the polyrhythmic pulse of this place, this huge windswept body of water and stone, this vexed being in whose flesh we're entangled. Becoming earth, becoming animal, becoming, in this manner, fully human. This is a book about becoming a two-legged animal, entirely a part of the animate world whose life swells within and unfolds all around us. It seeks a new way of speaking, one that enacts our interbeing with the earth rather than blinding us to it. A language that stirs a new humility in relation to other earthborn beings, whether spiders or obsidian outcrops or spruce limbs bent low by the clumped snow. A style of speech that opens our senses to the sensuous in all its multiform strangeness. The chapters that follow strive to discern and perhaps to practice a curious kind of thought, a way of careful reflection that no longer tears us out of the world of direct experience in order to represent it, but that binds us ever more deeply into the thick of that world, a way of thinking enacted as much by the body as by the mind, informed by the humid air and the soil and the quality of our breathing, by the intensity of our contact with the other bodies that surround. Yet words are human artifacts, are they not? Surely to speak or to think in words is necessarily to step back from the world's presence into a purely human sphere of reflection. Such precisely has been our civilized assumption. But what if meaningful speech is not an exclusively human possession? What if the very language we now speak arose first in response to an animate, expressive world, as a stuttering reply not just to others of our species, but to an enigmatic cosmos that already spoke to us in a myriad of tongues? What if thought is not born within the human skull, but is a creativity proper to the body as a whole, arising spontaneously from the slippage between an organism and the folding terrain that it wanders? What if the curious curve of thought is engendered by the difficult eros and tension between our flesh and the flesh of the earth? Is it possible to grow a worthy cosmology by attending closely to our encounters with other creatures and with the elemental textures and contours of our locale? We are by now so accustomed to the cult of expertise that the very notion of honoring and paying heed to our directly felt experience of things, of insects and wooden floors, of broken down cars and bird-pecked apples and the scents rising from the soil, seems odd and somewhat misguided as a way to find out what's worth knowing. According to assumptions long held by the civilization in which I've been raised, the deepest truth of things is concealed behind the appearances, in dimensions inaccessible to our senses. 1,000 years ago, these dimensions were viewed in spiritual terms. The sensuous world was a fallen, derivative reality that could be understood only by reference to heavenly realms hidden beyond the stars. Since the powers residing in such realms were concealed from common perception, they had to be mediated for the general populace by priests who might intercede with those celestial agencies on our behalf. In recent centuries, an abundance of discoveries and remarkable inventions have transformed this culture's general conception of things. And yet the basic disparagement of sensuous reality remains. Like an old collective habit very difficult to kick, the directly sensed world is still explained by reference to realms hidden beyond our immediate experience. Such a realm, for example, is the microscopic domain of axons and dendrites, and neurotransmitters washing across neuronal synapses, a dimension entirely concealed from direct apprehension, yet which presumably precipitates or gives rise to every aspect of our experience.
Somewhere along the line, we began to see all the other beings, vegetable, plant, mineral, and animal, as resources for ourselves. Instead of as equal brothers and sisters in this web of life, just from different nations.
I don't mean to sound persnickety, but like, for instance, before we started, you mentioned that after being a vegan for many, many years, you now eat some meat. We can explain a little bit. You can talk about that a little bit.
You see, in my experience through direct interspecies communication, I've come to learn, really through direct experience, that there's no difference in consciousness between a member of a plant species or an animal species. And this is where I reached a kind of a crisis of conscience, because I had been vegetarian first and then vegan for a number of years. And then I was taking my advanced training in interspecies communication and began having conscious conversations with my lettuce leaves and my tomatoes. And thought, oh no, what am I to do now? And I'm certainly nowhere, seeking or attaining anything that resembles a level of awakening that allows me to be breatharian. And I'm amazed at those people who can, but I'm definitely not there. And so, as we're walking every day, we're squishing insects under our feet. As we are favoring plant foods, we are ignoring the sentience and the beautiful wisdom and intelligence of those plant species. And I've had some chats with some plants who've grown in the agricultural fields that are covering the planet and deforesting the very lungs of our earth. And those plants are having a dastardly, very unpleasant time in their experience of existence. Pesticides, unnatural growing environments, being grown in straight rows that are so unkind to them and their families. They don't have a sense of community. They're taking the brunt and the full frontal force of the elements coming at them when they're grown in unnatural configurations. So the world is very full of pretty unhappy plants as well as animals. And I could certainly never support agriculture as it stands in the commercial sense, and personally I never support factory farming either, because of the quality of life of the plants and the animals while they are embodied. And in the great recycling that this earth is, all plants, all animals, including ourselves, do just feed back into the system.
Yeah. Apropos of this point, one time I was in a lecture with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and he said, if you have to eat somebody, eat lesser evolved life. So he kind of bought into that sort of Hindu paradigm of there being levels of evolution, of species. But I guess maybe his implication was that nature has less invested in a lettuce leaf than it does in a cow or something.
Yes, and there are different paradigms too. Again, different belief systems that have hierarchical structures, and that just hasn't been my experience in connecting with plants as well. And interspecies communication is quite literally that. It's happening out there the whole time between different species. It's not just us, kind of high-minded human who comes along and gets to connect with another. Interspecies communication is alive and well out there. I remember once noticing a bunch of bees around a single solitary sunflower that was on the edge of a field. And unknowingly at the time, I was projecting, and the question I asked the sunflower, I connected with the sunflower, is like, aren't the bees bothering you? Because to my mind, if I'd imagined myself with that many bees incoming, clearly I was feeling a bit like that would bother me, and I'd inadvertently created that projection even in the asking of my question.
You probably loved it.
A better way. Probably loved it, did love it. The answer came back from the sunflower, and so hard to put words to these things, but the energy of it that my brain could best give words to was that the bees kiss me with their awareness.
Nice.
And what a beautiful dance of mutual being they are in that moment.
Goats are amazing because they're born ready to leap. A reminder to us all to embrace joy wherever we find it.
Well, animal or interspecies communication really is the term that's come to be used to describe the energetic transference of direct knowing and of shared experience. And usually the setup is that happens between two beings who are focused on each other and connecting in a state of empathy to be able to understand and really deeply understand each other. What on earth this has to do with awakening? I have found that the animals and the natural world at large to have been my greatest spiritual teacher. And this is even in the context of sitting for over 10 years with the Sangha and all sorts of other forays in the spiritual realm, broadly speaking. And if what can be regarded as spiritual qualities across any discipline include states of being like presence and awareness and absolute acceptance of what is, then the non-human animals have got that. As the sentient beings that they are, which can be defined as self-aware, which they are, they have these qualities readily available to them in their shining, ever-present authenticity. And this is why it has a lot to do with awakening to self, or at least a clearing out of ego stuff and things that are nothing to do with the present moment or the collective good for that matter. Humans, when we connect with the non-humans, we pick up on almost a feeling of that limbic resonance. We get to bathe in their states of being. And that can't but affect us. It certainly does affect us in all sorts of positive ways. And another way, or reason that this has a lot to do with awakening, is it really is about us remembering our native states. This is about us humans remembering our original wiring, how our brains and how the intelligence of our heart, more importantly, were once, in our conscious awareness, deeply wired to the collective, to all the beings in our immediate environment, the very particles of soil under our feet, the spider and her web, the leaf on every tree, the root under the ground, or the deer species in the distance. And as we again remember, through communication, through connection, as we again remember, we literally again become members of the greater collective. And we learn more and more about those unified states of shared awareness, and we experience ourselves less and less as separate from the web of life. Thank goodness I'm not communicating with the mind and those other non-humans. That would just be an absolute circus, pardon the pun. And nothing more rudimentary, no, but yes, connecting with the non-mind, connecting with the essence. And I'll speak more about that in a bit, but when we are connecting with any other being, we're connecting with their essence, completely unrelated to brain size or function. And biologists like to measure intelligence by sort of brain size to body ratios and all these sorts of things that are completely irrelevant.
Cerebral cortex and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if intelligence were based on brain size, we'd be in a spot of bother because there are several species that have brains larger than us. And, neuroscientists still barely understand how our own brain functions actually as humans. And they still don't know how the melon-shaped organ deep in the dolphins and whales' brain functions, how that serves them through echolocation. We can't figure it out. So yes, there might be a hierarchy in one measurement system looking at brain function, but that's got nothing at all to do with intelligence or with sentience or with subjective experience. To come back to the first part of your question. So subjective experience has got nothing to do with brain function or even the presence of a brain. There's as much experience available to a rock who's been in place for eons as there is available to a tree who's been standing perhaps a few decades, or if they're lucky, a little bit longer. And as there is to a passing ant or a butterfly who's going to live for just a few weeks. So subjective experience is just that. It's subjective through the filter of that being's range of experience that's possible. And I do mean their sensory experience as well. So there may be some limitations or some additions compared to us humans. For example, insects like bees can see in the ultraviolet range of the spectrum as an ordinary sighted phenomenon, and we can't. Mm-hmm. So there, bees' subjective experience is already much more expanded on the visual front than us humans. Nonetheless, we are connecting with the essence of that being, and intelligence is not something that can be measured, and intelligence is not relative. Intelligence is a simple expression and a knowing of perhaps a version of self, or at least the expression of this thing that comes through self. And at the same time, one's connectedness to the whole. With the essence of the other, it's actually our essence that's connecting with them as well. So I happen to have to use my brain to get focused and all those sorts of things, and watch my breathing and become calm, and essentially try to dehumanize myself in that moment so that my humanness can fall away and not interrupt things and not interrupt my ability to be with the other and be with the moment. So my essence, that mysterious, unnameable, and perhaps indescribable aspect of self is what is really doing the connecting and the communication. And it is my essence that is receiving the experience of the other and receiving that knowing. But I don't know about it consciously until my unconscious or intuitive data that I've received has run against my mental database of stored life experiences and vocabulary words and sensory stimuli that I have stored in my brain. And when that incoming intuitive data finds a match in my brain, then a little flag goes up and a word pops into my head, or a smell, or a mental image. And that's when I know that I've received data for the first time. But I've already received it at my essence level before that time.
One of the things I found most fascinating about the videos I watched on YouTube of you doing your work is the expression on your face while you're doing it. You just settled into this really innocent, clear, settled state, which is really evident on your face. And then the communication takes place. That was as fascinating as whatever content you were coming up with in the communication. And I mention that because of what you just said, that you have to be totally clear and centered and balanced and without any kind of static in order to do this.
Indeed. Actually, my grandmother commented on that the first time she saw it. She phoned me from a semi-arid high desert where she was living. She's like, "Hello, Anna, dear. Your face looks so different. You look like an angel in church." Of course, I'm completely unaware of it because I'm not trying to, be anything or be in an elevated state. It's just about dropping and dropping. But I do get that feedback when I have people around me and we're in nature or in front of an animal and connecting. I get that feedback afterwards. But during the time of the communication, I am largely unaware of self. Like, really, I don't know. The persona drops away and my ego-based identity takes a little bit of the background. And the inner narration and the dialogue, the internal critic that's going is just background noise. I don't bother trying to push that away because, as Carl Jung rightly said, what we resist persists. So I don't bother to give my attention and my focus to those thoughts that I'm finding unhelpful. Instead, I just stay with the moment and stay with the moment. And the best way I know how to do that from my animal communication mentors is mindful breathing. Just simply watching my natural breathing rhythm, seeing as the mind insists on being busy with something. May as well just tell it to run along and watch the breathing, which presumably I'm doing anyway. Through animals, we get reminded of our own nature and of non-separation. Yes, communication is nothing at all to do with knowledge about a certain species, which could lend us to project onto any individual member of that species some beliefs or generalizations. And that's not appropriate at all. We're dealing with a sentient being after sentient being after sentient being when we're dealing with individuals. And so it behooves me to constantly be looking at who I am in that equation. Because if I'm to know the truth and the real thoughts, feelings, what's moving for that other, I need to be a clean slate and as neutral as possible on the inside. And this is why this form of interspecies connection is not really about learning any fancy technique or having a magic wand waved or having one's 27th strand of DNA activated. It's nothing unnatural like that. It really is about clearing out the baggage and continue clearing out. Well, if we were all to have reached that state, we wouldn't even be having this call, none of us. So it's not about having achieved that, but it is about the inner awareness, again, the inner tracking, so that I can notice when even my desire for a wished-for answer from the animal is getting in the way of me perhaps clearly hearing their answer.